I think definitely that higher level thinking isn't hierarchical is a huge one because I see it so often in, teachers or whatever, like, oh, they can't do this basic thing.
Hmm.
So we're not going to give them the opportunity to do this higher level thing.
Hmm.
And, and so that's a huge thing, even with you know, kids that don't fall in the gifted spectrum
Hmm.
according to whatever. Um, Still, like, oftentimes learning disabilities are struggles with certain basics, like
Hmm.
basic math, but then they can get the concepts, or basic
Hmm.
reading, but they can get the comprehension.
Hmm.
Um, and so just understanding that higher level thinking isn't hierarchical,
Hmm.
and sometimes things that we think that you might think are easy are literally hard.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
difficult. They're not,
Hmm.
it's not just that they're boring or that
Right.
they're, it's that they're it is difficult to engage your brain
Hmm.
on something that doesn't stimulate it in a certain
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Peace, my people. Welcome to I Must Be Buggin', where we have honest, relatable conversations packed with powerful insights that spark curiosity and help melanated, gifted, and neurodivergent folks feel seen, safe, and celebrated. Here, labels don't have to feel like pathology, and complexity feels comfortable. Welcome to the latest episode of I Must Be Buggin'. This is your host, Sheldon Gay. As I say each and every time and sincerely mean it, it is a pleasure to have you here. We have a special guest with us that I'll share, her name and story here in a couple of seconds. But as we always do as well, let's start with a visual description for those that it's helpful for. So again, my name is Sheldon Gay. I use pronouns he and him. I am a Black man in my 40s with light brown skin. Today I have on my black over-ear headphones. I have on a red hoodie of my design which says, "Love doesn't require perfection." I have a mustache, a little tuft of hair I call a goatee. I have black curly hair that's faded on the side and the back. Behind me is a wall with some bookshelves that have some of my favorite personal items and books, including a pillow of my design which says, "Labels don't have to feel like pathology." And so with that, let me introduce you to our special guest and a friend of mine. I don't know how long we've known each other, but we'll get into that maybe in a little bit, just as we remember that. But anyway, let me introduce you to Aurora. After years of feeling too much, Aurora finally realized that intensity is the source of her greatest power. And now, instead of beating herself up about not measuring up to her own self-imposed standards, she is on a mission to help gifted and outside the box thinkers befriend their brains and use their fire without getting burned through her Embracing Intensity podcast and community, as well as tools to support neurodivergent minds. Aurora uses her personal experience as a twice exceptional adult, mom, and school psychologist to help others to better understand their intense strengths and challenges to work with their brain instead of against it. With that, thank you, Aurora, for joining us. Excited to have this conversation. Yeah, welcome to the pod.
Thanks. It's been a long time coming up.
Yes, yes.
Um, I guess
Yeah,
description.
yeah.
Let's see. I just turned 50, but most people don't think it, except for if you look at my hair, which is very salt and pepper, and down to my, well, it's probably about time to cut it because I might sit on it. Where my background is pretty unremarkable, except the shelf of Lego flowers behind me that you can't really see when I'm at the desk,
Very cool.
and wearing my red intense shirt of my design and an orange sweater over it, and a little necklace with wrapped stone green with a tree on it. So, and
Great.
glasses.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that visual description. Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those, who aren't as familiar with you as I am, but yeah, share a little bit about yourself and tell us what neurodivergence means to you.
Where do I start? Let's see. Well, I've been, this will be my 10th year of the Embracing Intensity podcast at the end of this
Mm,
year. Fall 2016 is when I started. And so the Embracing Intensity podcast came out of my work with highly excitable people.
That's so funny. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
started, actually, I don't know if you know this part, but it started with women. And I
Mm.
had a Facebook group called the League of Excitable Women.
Oh, no, I don't remember that. That's
But because I had men reach out to me asking if there was anything similar for men, and I was like, actually, there's not.
damn.
So I opened up, and there was really no reason it had to be women focused. So the first part of my podcast was mostly women, and then I expanded around the time I went to the Sang conference. I think that was probably
Mm.
2018, and there was something on that. What led me to that was my kid who had definite excitabilities and some behavioral challenges. And when I Googled it, I came up with the term overexcitable and realized that I recognize that in myself in a lot of ways. And as over the years, I've come to learn that it's not just a gifted specific thing. Not all
Mm-hmm.
gifted people are highly excitable. Not all highly excitable people are what would be considered gifted according to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whatever we measure giftedness by.
Right. Right.
Um, but it definitely overlaps with neurodivergence.
Yeah. And how would you define neurodivergence? I mean, I know that could be, again, we could have the entire podcast just about this part, but what is, when you think about that word, what does it mean to you?
Well, as a school psychologist, of course, the bell curve kind of rules a lot of things, even though I know there's massive limitations of standardized testing. And I acknowledge that. But when you look at the bell curve and you look at where people fall on that, neurodivergence to me is kind of anything that veers from the norm, which would include giftedness. I think it's kind of hilarious when people debate
Mm-hmm.
whether
Mm-hmm.
giftedness is a neurodivergence, because
Mm-hmm.
like how do you not diverge from the norm? Like
Right. Right. Right.
it's
Right. Right. Yeah.
um and so most of my work has been around twice exceptionality, which
Mm-hmm.
includes both the gifted end of the spectrum with some things that are on the lower end, mostly executive functioning,
Mm-hmm.
but often some other things.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I can definitely say for me that giftedness falls into the category of neurodivergence. I mean, just by definition, I mean, the idea that, you know, a mind that diverges from what would be considered quote unquote normal. Yes. I mean, definitively, right? Like that just is a simple way of putting it. And I mean, there's so many different conversations to be had about language and labels and all that kind of fun stuff. But I think fundamentally the point is that, right, that, a mind that just perceives and receives the world in a different way. Yeah, I'm sure that you see a lot of that. And I know that, again, in your work that you are working with folks who are discovering or who are like kind of revisiting that piece of themselves. So like, yeah, tell us a little bit more about your work, particularly, as I mentioned, there are people who are maybe discovering or revisiting this through burnout and other things. So like, tell us a little bit more about your work and how you're, helping people.
Well, a lot of my work has been around energy management and burnout recoveries, especially recently. And on my podcast, I've been having guest speakers, which you came and spoke last year, is on the topic of mirroring. And I've had less the last few years because, well, this year I went back to school full time as a school
Mm,
psychologist. And so that's a whole other thing we can talk about, how that's actually helped my creativity rather than hindered it, which is great,
hmm hmm
because I don't have to worry about where my income is coming from.
Listen, yeah, let's definitely touch on that.
So I have a couple workbooks, 3 workbooks now. My last 2 I released right before Christmas time. Not that, anyway, it's funny because I had it 50% off for like a week around my birthday, and no one bought it during that time, but I had some people buy it right before and right after. So I'm like,
That's
well,
interesting. Yeah.
but but I have my speaker series, so I have people come and speak on relevant topics to giftedness and neurodivergence and creativity and a lot of things on that
hmm
topic. And then I have my course that I've been doing for like 10 years now.
hmm
And last year I kind of did the live calls on those themes. This year I'm kind of, and that's what the workbooks are from. So I put them into workbook form in 2020 and little digital guides. And now I put 4 of those together to make each of the 3 workbooks. So there's 12 guides and the 3 workbooks. And so that's kind of the main thing right now. As I'm going back to work full time, I'm focusing on the just kind of building my audience, and I'm re-examining what my membership looks like. I have an all access membership that has all my content. I did a planner club that turned into a neurodivergent toolkit and all of this other stuff. But I have like, I don't know, 50 plus conversations from my guest call library. And I'm continuing to grow that, but I had to reduce it, not just for the workload, but because I went to 1 episode a month. And if I had guest speakers every month, then I wouldn't have the time for interviews. So, or solo episodes. And so my podcast has solo episodes, interviews, and guest speakers talking on related topics.
Yeah. I mean, and I've taken, as you know, taken part in many of those, and it's really good. I like the fact that again, there's a place for people from many different walks to kind of find their way in, and yeah, like I liked how you kind of offered access to the work that you've already done through those conversations. I think a lot of people, it's interesting when people come in and they're like, oh, this is the one thing I wanted to highlight or like, focus on, and really being able to dig into that. And so folks get that value through those calls. I know that probably works easier for me, and I don't know for others as well. Like it's funny, I just finished a book that someone had given me the physical book, and after listening to the audio book, I told them it was an amazing book, but it was so amazing because of how I read. It would have taken me like a year to get through. So I was glad that I had the option for the audiobook just because of, like I said, how things work for me. But I also want to kind of circle back on this part about, burnout recovery and different things of that nature. Like how would you say, that your work specifically applies to folks who are recovering from burnout and like dealing with that?
Well, the workbook the course and workbooks came out of my first journey out of burnout. And then more recently, I have had an even more extreme burnout. Funny enough, both of those burnout recoveries happened after my marriages ended. So we can see contributing factors to my burnout. The last time it was not just that, it was a combination of all at once. I got married, moved to the country, and there was one other thing that happened like all at the same time. And so a lot of major changes that made a lot of the habits that I had gotten into kind of went out the window. Also, marrying some people with a high metabolism, don't recommend. I feel much better on more of like a paleo type diet, but that doesn't always work for a lot of people. And I did it on my own great because it makes me feel healthy. It was like the one time I stayed consistent with something. Anyway, that's a side note. But as far as the burnout recovery goes, I've had chronic pain and fatigue my entire adult life. And so I always had those like shoulds. You should eat better, you should exercise more, you should do this, you should do that, you should. And so my the general course is kind of a self-regulation course and more about supporting yourself rather than shoulding yourself. So not, instead of using self-control, you're helping set systems in place to self-regulate better. And so I've been revisiting myself and tying back to the work piece, because I feel like there's some neurodivergent people who can't have a boss, and there's some neurodivergent people who absolutely need a boss. And I fall into that category. Not, I've learned, because I can't be productive when I don't have a boss, because I did some amazing things the last 10 years, especially during the pandemic. In fact, I had a creative spurt, but when it comes to the parts that actually make money,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hate it. I
Yeah.
hate marketing. I hate all of that stuff. And so I couldn't force myself to do the things that I needed to do to make money off my creative work. And so then it became a stress. And then add to that the fact that when I was just a school psychologist, I would just decompress all summer. But when I was doing coaching and creative work, there is no decompressing over the
Right.
summer.
Right.
And so what I've found is now that I'm back full time, I've actually been more creatively productive because I don't have to make money off of it. And so I can do,
Understood.
I mean, eventually I wouldn't mind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But right now, my goal is more around supporting people in their energy management. I'm doing it. My next podcast and video series is going to be on recharging when unconventional ways to recharge when you can't quit your day job. And I kind of got input from my community. And so I'm putting together that I'm hoping to record during my break this week that I have. And so yeah, I've done a lot of creative things now that I'm not worrying about it earning a living.
Yeah. Listen, you touched on some really, I mean, I don't know about anybody else listening, but some things that are like very relevant to me and just I think would be worthwhile to dig into. So like I love that you talked about the self-control versus self-regulation. This reminds me of a number of different conversations that I have. I think more broadly as we think about helping and supporting each other as neurodivergent folks, particularly like those who maybe late identified or those who haven't been able to live long enough with the knowledge of like what's really happening with them. There are things that tend to be about control, right? And whether that's because of external factors, right, where people are telling them like, don't do this. And so like there's like this masking piece of how do I just follow the orders of the world? And then there's also this part of, trying to control one's environment and oneself so that you can move through the world and feel at least a little bit comfortable. But this shift of not trying to control to, again, finding ways to regulate. I mean, I may have, kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but I'd love for you to maybe just talk a little bit more about what that means for you. Like, what was that journey like, for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is part of the reason why I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until 45 was that when I dropped out of college the first time, I had an appointment. I gave them all my paperwork from school, and then I never followed up on an appointment, and I lost all my school paperwork. But at the time, I was like, well, I know I have it, and I have coping strategies, so I'm fine. I don't need a diagnosis.
Right.
And then that's when I realized that those coping strategies were what was burning me out, right? Because I had to rely on urgency to get anything done. And so when you're relying on urgency to get anything done, then that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
And so that's why I finally got the diagnosis. I tried medication. It didn't, I felt like the side effects were worse than, and so I ended up just accepting that my coffee was my self-medication. And so I started taking it black so that I'm not adding all sorts of unhealthy crap to it. So that is my stimulant of choice. But I lost track. What was I saying? So the regulation piece. And so I realized like how much of it is happening subconsciously. Like I never really thought of myself as a masker. I'm very transparent, very open. But I realized a couple of years ago, I had been in the same school for 14 years and I didn't leave because it functioned it was predictable. It ran, pretty smoothly. I could, but I started to realize after the pandemic, there was a lot of like underlying kind of passive aggressive stuff that was happening, and just they wanted everything to look neat and tidy. And that was just not like, I want to have those conversations openly. And in fact, that's why I've actually been pulled into like legal stuff, because parents know that I'm going to be transparent, and they sense that from me. And, you know, my goal is to help come up with something that works for everyone and with the child's best interest. But having those conversations openly makes certain people uncomfortable. And so when I got moved, because just there was some FTE reassignment, I ended up at the project-based high school. And they were undergoing some massive restructuring, which was very stressful. And then I got a preschool, which also was going through some massive restructuring. So by all outside measurable factors, both of those buildings should have been much more stressful, because it was like massive restructuring, lots of budget cut factors, lots of administration. It was lots of things that these two buildings are going through. But my stress went down because I felt appreciated. I felt like I could be open with administration. I felt like just I could use my strengths. And so when I went full time, they looped in the middle school into that picture as well, the project based. So now I'm at the project based school and the preschool, which seems funny because it's, you know, secondary and preschool, but I actually like them because it's just, I feel more collaborative, and, you know, they both have their stressors, and there's still, you know, challenges, but for me, it's less stress because I can be fully myself and I'm fully accepted. So the reason that ties in to me is because I hadn't realized that I was masking it all in that other situation. Like it didn't occur to me. Like I felt I mean, yeah, there are certain people that I would be careful what I said around, but it hadn't, the weight of it hadn't really registered until after I was out of it. And so, yeah. So it's that hidden, that sometimes really knowing where you can be fully yourself. That's a big piece for me.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is something we could spend the entire podcast talking about, the episode talking about, because, yeah, I mean, I think, again, people's journey, I mean, this is broadly applicable, but certainly applicable to those of us who are kind of, you know, going through a burnout or going through major life transitions, right? And incorporating, like really incorporating, again, whether or not a label was used, you know, or presented to us when we were younger or not, you know, there's a difference, because whatever, ADHD or giftedness or any of these different things, when you're in grade school, this means, you know, something specific, really, as it relates to like you being able to complete a homework assignment, for example. Like there are very specific things, but then as an adult, those things aren't exactly applicable, right? And some of these ways in which they present for you mean that you can miss that whatever ADHD is actually impacting, you know, how I'm showing up or how I'm receiving what's happening in my environment. And that's how certain coping mechanisms are perceived only as coping mechanisms, as opposed to, oh, I'm coping because of these other things that I kind of have going on. But once you fully integrate like all the pieces, these things start to reveal themselves. And then, like you said, I loved again this part about the endpoint, you know, the authenticity, being able to move and live authentically, because that's when it's not about the environment necessarily. It then becomes about how you can show up and how you can manage what comes your way. Because I do think that there is a significant amount of energy that we can find ourselves spending on, again, trying to just control things and trying to limit things that are maybe uncomfortable or whatever, right? So yeah, but again, really, that to me is, like I said, a really big point to kind of touch on something that you know spoke about, but really, like, you know, kind of get into this school piece. Like, let me just ask this question, and maybe we can, you know, continue to branch off a little bit. Why do you think that the work that you do is important for schools? You know, working, you know, as a school psychologist, like, why do you think that, you know, the work that you do is important in schools?
Well, and that actually ties directly. I was trying to hold on to the thought. My brain keeps like losing these threads, but it actually ties directly to something that I wanted to touch on with the diagnosis, and that is that oftentimes diagnoses, whatever,
Yeah, whichever
are
way.
based on how our symptoms affect those around us, and not how they're affecting us inside.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you're looking on the surface as a successful student or
hmm
successful adult,
hmm
and you've got all of these markers of success,
hmm
then people will dismiss that you might have a disability, but what
Yeah.
they're not seeing is the internal toll it takes.
Yeah.
And so, for example, for me, that was chronic pain and fatigue.
hmm
And
hmm
I knew from college before, like, that was the core of my issue, was probably a heightened nervous system and just picking up on too much crap, you know.
hmm hmm hmm
That
hmm
kind of goes to the core of my issues. But as far as the work within the school system goes, there's kind of two ends of it, because I work with the ones that get to the point of needing special education support. And
hmm
so they're going to be showing some degree of academic impact.
hmm
But it's been nice to be able to work with kids that are maybe kind of on the line there, where they're not necessarily needing an IEP, but they are impacted. And so being
hmm
able to be involved in that, even at the preschool level, I found that honestly,
Hmm.
I've like a lot of the behavioral kids, like you'll sit in a meeting and they'll be ticking off a list of like gifted characteristics. Even ones where they're like, oh well, they were screened and they didn't and they didn't qualify because they were like 130 standard score, which is like 98th percentile.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But their social was like, not, anyway. So it's that mix, or that preconceived notion of what is disabling is not necessarily what a school system is going to define that way. I mean,
hmm
even I myself, when I got tested in college, she kind of blew me off and was like, why'd you
Hmm.
even take this test? But yet there was a 50-point discrepancy between my visual processing and my auditory processing.
Mm.
And one of my scores was like kindergarten level, even though it was 25th percentile. So the range of normal was at, but still, that's even if it's within normal limits, my visual processing is up here. So like
Right.
there's a disconnect. And the one helpful thing that someone told me there was, well, because reading was a struggle for me, and they said reading actually, you process reading more like auditory information than
Hmm.
visual information, because it comes in one piece at a time
hmm hmm
instead of looking at it holistically, which
Yeah.
is how we process most visual information. So it's
That's interesting.
sequential.
Yeah.
And so
Huh.
understanding that, I'm a big picture thinker. I miss details unless I'm in a hyper focus mode, and then I'll like narrow in on a detail. But most of the time, I'm a big picture thinker. And so, yeah, the auditory information, reading one thing at a time, I'm a big picture. When I'm learning a new program, I want bullet points and pictures. I don't want to read a bunch of text. I'm not going to take it in. And so that getting past our preconceived notions, and I have the other end of kids where like they didn't get a cognitive test done and they're unquestionably gifted. I had this happen a couple times, but one in particular, this kid at the end of it says, well, all of this time I thought I wasn't very smart because I don't do, or wasn't as good at things as other kids, and now I know I just need more challenge to engage my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And this kid has thrived in a project-based setting, and I love to
Yeah.
see it. And if no one had ever done the cognitive testing,
Yeah.
I mean, in the right setting, maybe they would have picked up on it. But this kid was in 7th grade at the time
Yeah.
and thought they weren't very smart, and they were like, and we're not even talking like spiky profile. We're talking like completely gifted across the board. He had no idea.
That's sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish what you're
I
saying.
was just going to say, and the reason why, part of how that shifted things is that idea of the challenge. When you see in the testing how they like really get into it when it's a challenge, but
Mm-hmm.
then when it's not, when they see it as more of a task,
Mm-hmm.
they just
Mm-hmm.
kind of meh, and
Yeah.
they just do okay.
Right.
And you really can see that with certain kids. And when you can present it in such a way and they start to shift their thinking, like say in science, I had another one where the science teacher was like, he's suddenly engaging now that he's, and it was because I had a conversation about seeing things like a challenge. And he
Mm-hmm.
started approaching a science class like a challenge, and
Yeah.
it was a noticeable difference in his engagement.
Yeah. No. This is okay. Sorry. Were you going to say
Oh,
something else?
there was one more thing on that one. Is
Okay. Go ahead.
that kid, they were going to put into a smaller resource class because
Hmm.
of behaviors,
Mm.
which
Hmm.
is like the worst thing you could do because
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. This is absolutely gold right here. I mean, I don't even know where to begin really because this is exactly one why, you know, I do this podcast and why I have folks like you come on to be able to share these kinds of stories. Every single time I hear a story like this, it validates the as you know, the work that goes into producing a podcast, right? Because again, what most people would think with a student like that is, you know, how are we going to control them? How are we going to get them to, again, just align with what most students are doing? And that really isn't the challenge, right? And there might be teachers who are again looking like pointing the finger at the student and saying, hey, like this student doesn't care, this student doesn't want to try it. And it's like, have we ever reflected on how we're actually watching for this student to light up? Because if we are, all of a sudden we see, oh, this, and I know personally this to be true, that as I reflect back on my youth, and even in grad school, I've told people I knew in grad school, and this is really when I first realized what was going on, but like when I am like kind of like cracking jokes or whatever, like in class, or just like not really, it's not because the material necessarily was above my head or whatever. It was because I wasn't challenged. And so I needed that energy to go somewhere, right? And so teachers who again might have been looking at me or at this student or others, right, that would be like, I mean, I to share, like there were definitely teachers who thought I wasn't smart enough, and I would be like, that doesn't really make any sense, right? Like this materials, I came from an engineering program in my business. I was doing business, and no shade to business majors or anything like that, but like there were not concepts that were far beyond my understanding. It was more so like, how are we approaching this? And I love too that you talked about this, like the student doing well in the project based scenario, because that definitely works much better for me. I love the application of everything, right? And how is this going to actually um, work and play out, and how do I use problem solving versus just memorization or something like that, right? And so yeah, I mean, again, I could go on for days, but I don't want to give you space to share what you want to, something else you want to share.
Well, that ties directly to like one of the big themes that I've found over the years is higher level thinking is not hierarchical.
Mm.
And so when we force kids to master the quote basics,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
then don't give them the opportunity for the challenge,
Mm-hmm.
then we lose out on some really rich possibilities with these creative thinkers and problem solvers and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. Because for someone with a certain type of brain, things that are easy are actually hard
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't engage your brain in the same way. That's where the
Yeah.
kid got that terminology.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it doesn't engage your brain, you literally can't.
Yeah.
Like sometimes, I mean,
Yeah.
it's you have to force yourself to engage,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. Your brain will just not engage in the same way, and so it's hard to do. And so often, in not just in school but in work as well, we force people to master the basic stuff before we give them opportunities for advancement or challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be like, well, they can't do basic math, so how are they going to do,
Mm-hmm.
trigonometry or
Mm-hmm.
calculus or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I still never memorized my multiplication tables, but
Right.
I probably could have done calculus. I didn't because my sister's experience, but
Mm.
in trigonometry, I couldn't memorize the formulas, and I figured it out through logic, which ended up
Mm.
taking way longer and
Mm-hmm.
creating more paths for mistakes. But I remember a teacher saying, only you could make that mistake because everyone else was just memorizing it. Like,
Right, 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 right. That's actually a fascinating story because yeah, like when you are just memorizing, it's almost like what's bringing to mind is, I mean, a couple of different things. I'm trying not to get too in depth into like AI and different things of that nature, but
mm-hmm,
like it makes me think about systems that basically repeat or copy
mm-hmm,
will repeat and copy the same kinds of errors, right? And there won't be anything, they won't also produce anything that exists outside of those existing patterns, right? But for those minds and systems that have that ability to, or are not relying upon memorization and repeating, right, that are actually walking the path, yes, there will be new kinds of errors, but there will also be new kinds of insights that can come from that. Because I would assume too, like even the idea that only you could make that kind of mistake or whatever. I'm sure that there were also times where it's like only you could have like found the way to the answer, you know, that way, and that to me in the grand scheme of life, like that is so much more important. I mean, you can, and especially when it comes to formulas, like any degreed engineer will tell you, like you can keep a book of formulas on your desk. Like there will not be a teacher, your physics teacher will not be there saying, "Oh, you didn't remember, Laplace transform." Like that's not going to happen. But if you don't even understand really how to utilize those formulas, if you don't really understand the logic and the path to get there, I mean, I could go on for days,
mm-hmm,
but that to me is much more important. And there's a balance of yeah, making sure that some of those core principles or whatever are understood, but I think we limit our students, and eventually, when we are kind of forcing everybody into the same paths. And I don't know if you have something else you wanted to add on to that, but I just wanted to kind of make sure that we ask this question of like, yeah, like what can parents and adults, learn from this work as well? Because right now we're kind of talking specifically about the students, but the parents and those reflecting back from adulthood, like what other things can they learn from this?
well, I think, oh gosh, I wrote actually a whole article on assessment for parents, like
Mm,
educational assessment for twice exceptional. So just kind of talking about basically questions to ask and things like that.
mm-hmm,
um, but I think, well, there's a couple things that come up in meetings with parents, and one is that challenge piece. Like if we can challenge them, or if we can help them see it as a challenge instead of a task,
mm-hmm,
then that can help with the motivation. And then a big one that I still haven't found the best term to use in a that's in an education friendly environment,
mm.
but basically I kind of, it's okay to half-ass it. Like
I
it's
understand
an
why that
art.
wouldn't be education friendly. Go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
It's an art to know when it's appropriate and when it's not, because a lot of these kids, when they're really dedicated and into it, they're going to put their whole heart into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if we force them to put their whole heart into everything, they're not going to, they're using a lot of energy for
Mm-hmm.
things that they could just do good enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if they can just do good enough on the things that aren't as important to them, they'll have more energy
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the things that really light them up.
Yeah. I mean, that is a great way of describing, like kind of even going back to what we were talking about earlier about this control versus self-regulation piece. I think there are a lot of us who are burdened by this desire, like you said, to be like it. For those of us who, when we get locked in, if we feel like this task is necessary, we get like totally locked in. Um, and there's only but so much energy in a day that you get, right? And so there's this is not about judgment of good or bad or right or wrong or anything like that, but it's just a fundamental thing. Like there's only but so much energy you get in a day. And if you are going all in on every single task, especially or including the ones that don't require that level of energy, then like you said, when you're thinking about regulating, when you're thinking about, what you have, the time that you have for joy or other things, or things that you're just really interested in at the end of the day, like you may have already spent all of your energy, and recognizing that fact, but then also recognizing the fact that your well placed or well meaning intensity around something is there, lets you say, okay, like how do I don't need to go all in on this. How do I identify what is good enough? So with the idea that my good enough here, where it might feel a little uncomfortable, is going to give me so much more energy to go all in on the thing that just really lights me up. That journey, that path of figuring that out, I think is super, super powerful. And yeah, I think this also for parents can be helpful, because it is very easy as a parent to get caught up in the, one, what their school experience was like and like what they were told school was meant for, but then also, you know, kind of listening to what the teachers are saying about their child or what the environment's like, versus kind of challenging and pushing back and saying, well, hold on, like, yeah, I want for little Billy to, or, Jane or whoever, right, to progress through, I want them to get the good grades or whatever it is. And I want them to progress in a sequential and expected way. But that ultimately isn't like the real goal. Like, I'm trying to create a good human being. And how do I support doing that along the way while they're here in this environment, kind of learning these other skills? Because sometimes, yeah, you might then push back on the teacher and say, like, okay, again, I was having a conversation with somebody. What was it? I mean, even in today's conversation, right, when we were talking about this difference in understanding, auditory versus, visual, processing. If you know that the student, is stronger in whatever area, how do you make sure that you're always presenting them with something that aligns with their preference or whatever their need? Because yeah, like I can definitely say, um, you know, there definitely are times when, like you said, it was really interesting to hear you talk about this as a sequential piece, because I definitely can picture for me, like I'm definitely much more of a visual person, and I like to be able to see like all the components together. That's not how everybody's minds work. Everybody's mind works. But yeah, like if you are going to present something to me, like if you can show me like a chart or something like that, this going to work out a lot better. And sometimes teachers just get frustrated because they feel like, one, I've been teaching this way for the longest. Like, why should I change? Like, I've been doing this 30 years. I've graduated however many kids, like, and it's like, okay, but there could be a better way of doing it. And I think, again, that helping parents, advocate better for their child, and also understand their child, because again, that parent is the most important relationship as it relates to that child being able to love themselves and, like I said, be a good human down the road. Save your child a bunch of therapy down the road if you are learning from the work that like people like you are doing. So let me stop there.
Uh,
Go ahead.
I did want to add one last thing as a
Yep.
parent is that I want to acknowledge that this is a really hard time
Yeah.
to be a parent. And even me, as someone who's been a school psychologist for over 20 years
Mm-hmm.
and working with neurodivergent adults for over 10, my kid almost dropped out last year
Mm.
due to a variety of factors. And, I'm now solo parenting, and it's just there's a lot of, and pandemic definitely impacted all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up on virtual school for a while, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but
Mm-hmm.
it got us through, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're back. They're graduating this year. They're back part-time in person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm a huge advocate for hybrid options because I think the full day schedule doesn't work for everyone, and I
Mm-hmm.
wish there was more flexibility around that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and so there's
Mm-hmm.
been a whole bunch of positive shifts recently. But I don't really take credit for most of that. I mean, except for setting a foundation of openness and
Mm-hmm.
transparency and ability to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
That part, that's what I had to offer. But as far as like structures and things like that, I mean, I married a responsible adult, because that's quote unquote responsible adult, because I knew my where I lacked, and then ended up solo parenting. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anyway, long story, but the it's a hard time. It's a hard
Mm-hmm.
time to be a parent, and I just want to acknowledge that. And even quote unquote professionals are struggling with a lot of the things in parenting these days.
Yeah, no, let's be clear, right? It is tough. I mean, parenting unto itself is just a tough journey, right? It's a challenging one. And in these times where there are multiple factors at play that are more out of your control, right? When it comes to the internet, when it comes to, just different kinds of social interactions that your child will be asked to do, whether it be how schools are being, their resources are being much more limited, and just like so many different things, right? Let's not even get to talking about how they're trying to change curriculums and remove things that are valuable. And we can talk about that from an arts perspective, and we can also talk about that from a social justice perspective, right? So there's a whole set of things. But yeah, I agree that it is tough and it's not easy. For me, that's why I think, again, having folks that are helping to provide tools and insights is really, really powerful, and helping them to see their child. I had a guest on recently who was talking about his experience growing up where, and kind of reflecting on it, where parents would think that their child, that there was something broken about their child because they didn't understand neurodivergence. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like now that I kind of understand what's going on, I'm no longer like, asking them or berating them more specifically, right, about why they haven't done something exactly this way. I'm, able to have a more compassionate conversation about it. I'm looking at our time. I want to make sure to ask a few more questions, but I know one of the things you did mention that I did want to ask about, because this is like both a lived experience and one of the specialities of yours, as it were. Why do you think that some of this stuff could be more difficult for those who are twice exceptional?
Oh, good question. And sorry if my dogs start to bark. I realize I probably should have shut the shades downstairs because there might be someone walked by or something. I think they're
Mm,
quiet now, but that's why I was muting myself.
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, the thing with twice exceptionality is that the two ends of the spectrum often mask each other. And
Mm,
so their struggles go unrecognized, or their gifts go unrecognized, or both.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so I think that's one of the big challenges, is that people don't see the full spectrum of who they are and what their strengths and challenges are, because they mask each other sometimes.
mm-hmm,
And then the other thing being that depending on the type of twice exceptionality, what I had shared before about like basic things can be even more difficult because it doesn't engage the brain in some ways. And I don't think you have to be twice exceptional for that to be an issue. I think that can be an issue with executive dysfunctioning or giftedness in general, but especially if you have, if you're twice exceptional on the ADHD spectrum or whatever, then finding mundane tasks almost super difficult. Like things that people think are just basic are very hard, or just missing basic details when you can get super complicated things. That can be an issue in interpersonal relationships where like you may have deep intuitive understanding of certain aspects of the person, but at the same time miss things that they think should be obvious. And so, yeah, that just here's an example where I made a friend that later I think wanted more, and we were going to have a conversation. They're like, well, my therapist says I'm chasing you and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to, discontinue this, whatever. So, but part of our conversation was, I clarified that I was only interested in friendship, and that's how they approached it in the beginning. So that they led with that. And so, but as I started to feel some shift in their tone, I just wanted to clarify it. And they thought it was more of an appearance thing. And I was like, no, it's it's really the communication style. Like it's, I feel like we have very different ways of communicating and seeing the world. And they said something like, well, that's funny because I thought we had an intuitive understanding. And I realized because this person identifies likely autistic, and I'm a very open-minded person and I ask questions, but this person jump to some conclusions about me that weren't true based on their reality. And I had to explain it. And it was a lot of work to clarify like that, communication. And so we had very different perceptions of the world, but because of the work that I was doing to bridge that gap, they felt like we had this intuitive understanding because they're probably not used to someone taking the time to clarify and have those open conversations. And it is something that I do naturally, but with someone who sees the world very different than me, it's a lot of work. And so I realized that sometimes we don't see the work. And I feel like I actually had that observation with code switching. I was realizing that like there was someone where I felt like we had an intuitive understanding. It was like, well, they might not feel the same way because I suspect there's a little bit of code switching happening. And so, yeah, it was interesting because I feel like sometimes the work that someone else does to be understood feels intuitive to the other person, but then to the person doing that work, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think definitively one of the key things here is this acknowledgement, this awareness of the different experiences. I think one of the challenges for, many neurodivergent people that I run into is this, again, I consider myself to be a pattern recognizer, right? And I totally get that, but I think sometimes we can like overly intuit things that aren't actually, happening. And so that can, make this communication more difficult, which is why I think, there's a question about what kinds of work either person is doing, but also how clear and explicit communication is. I think it's important regardless, but I think sometimes it's even more important when are prone to like assumptions, I'll say, just for simplicity's sake, right? Because in those kinds of situations,
well,
you could go ahead.
Oh yeah, and this person did probably have a lot of pattern recognition and all of that stuff that you said. In fact, you had a podcast that I shared at the time, but they're filtering it with their lived reality. And
Yeah.
so they're noticing patterns, but then they're interpreting it in a way that doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and that's exactly the thing too, is because I was actually literally having this conversation with someone yesterday, and I won't like belabor this point, but I'll just say that it's really important. If we think about this as a projector, like if you have a projector, the projector projects onto a screen or some sort of background, right? And for absolute simplicity's sake, let's just consider that to be kind of the screen to be sort of the objective facts of things. It's the what you know your meaning making of a lot of that, your lived experience, and other things that you place upon it, like that's what makes up the full picture, right? All those things together make up the full picture. And so it's not as if some of those details were per se untrue. Like maybe you know you did say that exact wording or whatever, right? But it was like, oh, but if you take that and you make it to mean something completely different because of your lived experience, that's where things get all fuzzy. And the awareness of that is, again, a question that folks have to ask of themselves. But I think that's also why, again, this very clear communication around expectations and like what's being felt, and all that kind of stuff is super super important, particularly because I think, again, folks can again, whether it be friendship or otherwise, right, that when there is a longing for connection, that's when that meaning making can kind of get rose colored glasses very easily, let me say it that way. And so yeah, it's just super super important. Okay, let's I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to share. I'm looking at the time again. If you
Mm-hmm.
had anything else you wanted to share around, well, actually, let me just, because you can talk about this in these questions. So these are the questions that folks will know. I ask everybody, right? Which is, are there 1 to 2 things that you would say are keys to neurodivergent healing and thriving that you'd share? And particularly, again, if you, I know you wanted to share a bit about the work around burnout, but like regardless, are there 1 or 2 things that you'd say are keys to neurodivergent healing and thriving?
Yeah, I think a couple big things for me. One is like ditch the all or nothing thinking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
that is a practice in and of itself, because if we think we have to be all or nothing, then we're going to end up nothing, especially around the stuff that's not motivating.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so, like food, for example, I do much better when I'm just kind of tuning into what feels good and eating that way, but not forcing myself into it.
mm-hmm,
So right now I'm just gradually replacing my easy stuff with things that are more fitting to what makes me feel good.
mm-hmm.
Because anything all or nothing I could do for like a week or two.
Right, right.
That's just one example. But yeah, ditch the all or nothing thinking, focus. One of the big things that I'm focusing on is energy balance and self-regulation. So focus on supporting rather than forcing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Self-control is a limited resource, and so if
mm-hmm.
we're overusing it, then eventually it's gonna fizzle
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Same with all or nothing thinking. And so one of the big things, and I'm going to get into this on my next podcast and series, is the 5 areas of energy balance that we can
Mm-hmm,
look at, which are physical, mental, emotional, social, and then I call it connection because it was like spiritual or pro-social, or there it's all about connection.
yeah.
And so those are kind of areas. So if instead of looking at I want to change these habits and I'm going to force myself to do it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
if we look at what's energizing to me
mm-hmm.
and doing those things more, and what's draining to me, and finding ways to either do them less or make them less draining,
Yes, 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 yes.
then like those little micro changes are really more helpful than just the all or nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Bringing you back to the beginning of, yeah, yeah. No, that's, I mean, I am 100% on board as someone who, um, yeah, has definitely shifted. I've shifted my life a lot, and exactly what you're talking about was vital to that, right? I mean, not everything that I do every single day is pure joy, but recognizing how to make sure that I'm adding those things in. I think sometimes society can kind of teach us to, like, you can only have joy after you've arrived, quote unquote, or, like it's like, no, 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 like every day I deserve some joy. This is not like, this is something I can give myself every single day. And there are benefits to me doing that. And then similarly, as you were talking about, the things that aren't as energizing, one, how do you do them less? But I think the piece that people miss a lot is, how do you do them differently, or how do you make them less draining? Because again, there are just some things like I don't care what you say. There's no way that I'm going to want to, like, there's no joy in brushing my teeth. There's no joy in, just lots of different things, right? But those are things that you've got to do, right? And so how do you shift your thinking around them, or shift the way that you do them, the timing, whatever it is? But like, there are ways to still achieve those necessities without it taking away so much from, what you're doing. And a key part of that is realizing that, yeah, there's, this black and white, all or nothing kind of a thing is not the way to go, because it's not sustainable. So, okay, what are like one or two things that you wish the world knew or built more capacity for?
I think definitely that higher level thinking isn't hierarchical is a huge one, because I see it so often in, teachers or whatever, like, oh, they can't do this basic thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to give them the opportunity to do this higher level thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a huge thing, even with kids that don't fall in the gifted spectrum according to whatever. Still, like, oftentimes learning disabilities are struggles with certain basics, like basic math, but then they can get the concepts, or basic reading, but they can get the comprehension. And so just understanding that higher level thinking isn't hierarchical, and sometimes things that we think that you might think are easy are literally hard. They're difficult. They're not, it's not just that they're boring, or that they're, it's that it is difficult to engage your brain on something that doesn't stimulate it in a certain way.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, the more that we bring in the neuroscience into this, I think it really is helpful, because we've all had folks who would say, well, if you can do this, you should be able to do that. Or if you can't do this, how could you possibly do that? Or, any number of things that they're not expansive enough to reflect the reality of the fact that there are chemical and brain wiring things that we're actually, working through. And so when we recognize that, like, oh, okay, again, like, this is literally difficult. There's no speech that I can just give them that, oh, you know what? Thanks, Sheldon, for telling me that, because now it's actually just in a moment that just reminded me of people. I've seen this for like ADHD, but there's sort of a similar thing. But I know for like ADHD, people would be like, if you can't show up on time or whatever, people would be like, oh, just whatever, like, tell yourself that whatever, that it's important, or like, whatever it is, these things that people tell you. And it's like, yeah, if it was just as simple as like knowing that this is my friend's event, so I should be there, and like that was it, then I'd be there. Because it's not about the fact that I don't care about somebody. There are actual neurological things at play here. And that doesn't mean that there's, quote unquote excuse, right, for everything, right? There's still impact. But I think that, like I said, a lot of times people kind of miss the fact that there's this actual neurological process that they're working through. And so
well, that
oh yeah, go ahead.
That late example gives, because if you force yourself, it's not going to help, right? But if you put some systems in place, it's not going to work every time, but it might help more than trying to force yourself, because there's nothing that's
no. I mean, that's exactly it, right? I mean, I think even if we just simplify it and just go back to this theme again that you shared earlier, right, of the self-control versus self-regulation, right? The more this mind-body system that we have the more that you try to force and control and make everything like all or nothing, the outcomes are predictably suboptimal, to say the least. Right. And the more that there is this more expansiveness and this curiosity about what might actually be true beyond the accepted pattern or whatever, the better the outcomes, the better the opportunity for positive outcomes there are. Okay. So we've heard a lot of great things. We could go on for days, but so that people can stay in contact with you and like dive more into your work and different things of that nature. Tell us about your projects and how people can support you and also stay connected.
Well, let's see, my upcoming project is the Recharge series that I'm working on, and I'm hoping to record this break. It'll be on my podcast, and it'll be kind of dripped out as a short form series, and then eventually I'll release it as a long form video. But I'm releasing the short form series first. So that's kind of my immediate project. My long term, as we've discussed before, I actually have a few apps in mind, but I have one in particular that I had been wanting to get put together, and I managed to create kind of a prototype for a web-based version. Because what I realized when we had the conversation, market research is important, but we don't know what we don't know, and part of the thing with ADHD is out of sight, out of mind, and you can't necessarily visualize how it's going to work. So if you don't have a prototype to play with, then you don't know what the value is, right? So I'm going to meet with a few people to make some clarifications on how to use it, and then I'm going to send it out for folks to try out. And so I'll probably put that offer on my email list, which can be found on my website, embracingintensity.com, just to kind of get feedback on that, because my eventual goal would be to start doing some app development stuff, and that would require funding.
Yes.
And not just for the development of the app, but also for the marketing of it.
Yeah.
So I think this year my focus is just on growing my audience and establishing that platform even more as I go. And so I have some workbooks. I have a all access membership if people want to explore my content. I'm trying to get the individual pieces onto my website. I had a friend who helped me, and then I got a credit card scam. And so I had wow. 2,000 attempted purchases, and 5 went through. So I had to remove all digital products from my website for now until I figure that out. So my workbooks are available in print. My membership has all my content in it and all my call library and everything. But I'm still kind of working on how that membership looks now that I'm working full time and not as available for calls. So my monthly call has become mostly the people who've always come. So I invite, because it's not as open. But I do have my upcoming guest speakers. Oh, that was the other thing. Let's see. So we're going to have, in April, we're going to talk about nervous system regulation. Dr. Kimberly Douglas is coming back for talking about owning your worth. And then Inger Shea-Colsey, who I think you also know, is going to be coming to talk about neurodivergent energy balance.
Good.
And then in the fall, I've got in-person friend that I know through theater. He's a clown and does all sorts of fun stuff. And he's going to talk about finding humor in the mundane. And then my friend Coco Leary, who wrote a book called From Welfare to the White House. She's going to talk about moving from surviving to thriving, as someone who grew up in the foster care system and worked her way up. And then I'm going to talk about finding your people. So,
wow. Yeah, that's a lot of great content. And again, I can speak from experience. The calls are really good, really energizing. So please do. I will put all of Aurora's links and stuff into the show notes. So please do check those out. And yeah, I'll say as well, Aurora, good luck with this journey back into working full time. May ping you a little bit about that, but I know, again, appreciating that stability, and again, knowing that you're going to be able to do a lot of that great work that you're doing is really important. And I look forward to these other creative outlets, and the fact that you said like you're getting to do even more creative things now that you kind of have that piece locked in. So Always wishing you well. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, I'm looking forward to releasing this to folks soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of I Must Be BUGN. I hope you felt seen, safe, and celebrated by what you heard today. Don't forget to visit my website, sheldongaysbugn.com, where you can catch all of my episodes, book me to speak, and check out my merch. Don't hesitate to hit me up on socials either. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing humanized narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe. It helps our people find community. So until next time, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. Ashe.